we're going to look at subtracting integers, and basically we're just going to go through some example problems. We're not going to do a lot more than that, and then whatever you need help with after that, like you break out into some small groups and something like that, just let me know, and we can do that. There are different ways to look at this. First of all, if you were in a classroom with different teachers, they would probably explain some of this in slightly different ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at sort of where I like to be with this as an 8th grade teacher, because we combine like terms and do a lot of stuff with variables in the 8th grade. I feel like it's more helpful to view it a specific way, and that's the way we're going to do it in just a second. But we can back down and do something. I mean, so especially 8th grade, you guys may be familiar with last year, something called keep, change, and different things like that. If we need to, if you let me know that you're confused, we can break down and try to talk about it some of those other ways as well. So I'm going to start off on sort of the high end of that, because we're dealing with a lot of you guys are 8th graders, and I'm going to also share this with my 7th graders. But so the 7th graders especially, if you need us to break this down a little more, I can do it. The problem is the curriculum we're using is pretty quick, and so we just don't have a lot of time to go day by day on the small parts of this. So I'm going to start really kind of at our end goal here. We're going to go through it and see how you do, and then we can break it down more as we need to. Let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, the way that I look at these kinds of problems is the rules for subtraction are essentially the same as the rules for addition. Now, we do have to think of it a slightly different way, but essentially in the end, the rules are the same. So that means the rules are going to be same sign, add and keep, different signs, subtract, subtract, and take sign of highest number. So that's essentially what we're going to do. Okay, this was really bad. Let's do this. Okay, so that's really what we're doing. But we're going to have to look at it a slightly different way, and let me explain why. We've been doing all problems like this. -1 plus -4. So the last lesson I did was all things like this. This is actually the same problem. That's one of the things you eventually are going to look at. So this is different because it doesn't have a plus sign, it has a minus sign between them. So what I do when I'm doing problems like this is I think of it, instead of as 1 minus 4, I think of it as 1, and I'm combining it with a -4. I'm sort of adding it with a -4. So instead of saying 1 minus 4, I'm saying, well, I'm taking a -1, and I'm combining it or adding it with a -4. And gosh, I'm not very precise with my clicks today, I'll tell you. All right. And so the way that I sort of approach these is I say, well, I have a -1 here, a -4 here, and I'm going to put those together. I'm going to use my addition rules to combine those two integers. So you could just circle them like I did and say that and that, or I could sit here and I could rewrite them, which is sort of the other way a lot of teachers like to teach it, and say, all right, that's the same thing. I could say I'm doing -1 combined with a -4, or adding -1 plus -4, or I could rewrite it like that. Essentially, those are the same way of approaching this problem. I think of things less like subtraction now, and that's what you're going to have to do as you get older. We're not really subtracting. What we're doing is combining negative numbers. So I have two negatives, and I'm combining them with my addition rules. So now I'm going to go to my addition rules, and I notice that the signs are the same. So since I have the same sign, I'm going to add the two numbers. 4 plus 1 is 5, and keep the sign. So -1 minus 4 is -5. We're going to do the same thing again. So in this case, I have a 7, and I'm combining that with a negative 10. So I'm trying to learn to associate that minus sign and instead think of it as a negative sign on the number that follows. Sorry about that. So now I'm going to go to my addition rules because I'm thinking 7 plus a negative 10 or 7 combined with a negative 10. And I notice in this case there are different signs. So I know that I need to subtract. 10 minus 7 is 3. And since the negative number is bigger, 10 is bigger than 7, I'm going to keep the sign of the negative number. And we're going to just keep doing that same process as we go through until we get to below that line. And then we'll have to switch things up a little. So in this one, I have a 12 as my leading term. A term is just the number with its sign, and it also could have a variable and an exponent. So in this case, we're just dealing with numbers with signs. We'll talk about what term means at some point as when we get to expressions. All right, so and then the next term, it says minus 15. So I'm not going to think of it as minus 15. I'm going to think of it as combined with a negative 15. And then I'm going to use my addition rules. The signs are different, so I know I need to subtract. 15 minus 12 is 3. And the negative number is higher. 15 is higher than 12. So I'm going to take a negative. I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing to click that, but somehow I'm tabbing over with my mouse when I move my arm. All right, moving on to the next one. I have a 10, and I'm combining that with a negative 3. And so I know they're different signs, so I subtract. 10 minus 3 is 7. The positive is bigger, so it's positive 7. Hey, that's a problem you've been doing since like a very young grade. 10 minus 3 is 7. You probably knew that. I was just put that on there to show you that this approach and the way we're thinking of it gives you the same answer as the way you used to think of it. It's just this is helpful for these kinds of for these 3 kinds of problems because they end up with a negative answer, if that makes sense. All right, so moving on, we're going to get to some slightly more complicated problems, but not too bad. In these, we have 2 negatives in a row, and so that's where what I'm doing sort of breaks down a little bit. If I were doing the other method of keep, change, or changing the problem, it would help with this, but I still kind of associate what we just did with these kinds of problems to it, and let me explain how. When we have 2 negatives in a row, 2 minus negative 6, a negative symbol could be looked at as meaning the opposite. The opposite. So when I see 2 negatives in a row, what I'm thinking is the first one tells me to take the opposite of the second one. And so this first number is saying, all right, I need to change the sign on the 6. And so this problem is actually 2 plus 6 because one negative sign changes the other. It's almost like they cancel each other out. The first one says take the opposite of the second one. And so this problem is actually, when you're saying 2 take away a negative 6, is actually the same thing as 2 plus 6. So I am going to have to change this problem to reflect that. So I'm going to come over here and change that to 2 plus 6. So what I try to remember is these are the rules you're going to use, your addition rules, once you identify what your terms are and what signs go with what number. But if you ever have 2 negatives in a row, you have to change that. You can't leave it that way because one negative changes the other. So 2 plus 6, I don't even have to think about my integer rules because I know that 2 plus 6 is 8. I don't really have to give it a lot more thought. Continuing on, we have the same thing here. Now the first term is just a negative 6. We know that. We can just see that. But then I have 2 negatives in a row. One tells me to take the opposite of the second one. Basically, they cancel each other out. And so we end up with 6 plus 9. So that's a positive 9. If it helps, I can rewrite that problem as negative 6 plus 9. It's the same problem. So we have a negative 6, a positive 9. Different signs we subtract. 6 minus 9 is 3. And the 9's bigger, so it's positive 3. Last one. We're going to do the exact same thing. We have 2 negatives in a row, so one tells me to take the opposite of the other. And so basically both of those negatives are going to go away and become positives. And we end up with a problem that's actually 4 plus 2. 4 plus 2 is 6. So when you have 2 negatives in a row like that, one tells you to change the other. One says take the opposite of what comes next. And so the opposite of a negative is a positive. So 2 negatives in a row kind of cancel out and become a plus, becomes an addition problem. And then you still just use your addition rules. Same sign add and keep, different sign subtract, take the sign of the highest number. That subtraction, it's a relatively tough concept that's going to probably take some practice. So let me know what you need help with, and I'm here for you. I'll help you with whatever you need.